1964. It is a significant year because the year before, de Valois had retired as director of the company, and she wasn't just any director in a long line of directors, she was the founding director. So way back in 1926, she had founded a ballet school in London, in West Kensington, called the Academy of Choreographic Art. Quite a grand title, but she had grand ambitions for it. What she wanted to do was create an indigenous classical ballet school, and no such thing existed. So de Valois set up her school in 1926 with the express aim of training classical ballet dancers, first and foremost, who would then feed into a little fledgling classical ballet company. And this she knew she would have to attach to a repertory theatre in order to give her graduating students experience of working in theatre. So she went off to see Lillian Bayliss. Lillian Bayliss was the manager of the Old Vic Theatre, and the Old Vic used to put on plays and operas, and de Valois struck a deal with her, and they agreed that yes, she could work at the Old Vic, supplying dancers for their productions, choreographing the ballet numbers in an opera or a Shakespeare production perhaps, thereby giving her young students real stage experience, and eventually, as her graduates became strong enough and professional enough, there might be a possibility, said Lillian Bayliss, that when the Sadler's Wells Theatre reopened, because it had shut for refurbishment during the First World War, it had become gone to rack and ruin, and Bayliss led a campaign to refurbish it. When it opened in 1931, perhaps de Valois' students would be strong enough to form a little core company based at Sadler's Wells. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. And her school at that point in 1931 was able to move from its premises in West Kensington across to Sadler's Wells Theatre. So you now had the beginnings of a real national ballet company, because if you have a school on site training dancers, classical dancers, to feed into a company whose repertoire is based on classical ballet, then you really do have the beginnings of a national indigenous ballet company. And that is how her whole enterprise began. Of course, by 1964, the time of the This Is Your Life recording, the company had graduated from the Sadler's Wells Theatre, because during the war they toured up and down the country and indeed went abroad for ENSA, had become a bit of a national institution, so it was decided after the war they should become resident at the Royal Opera House. They were still slightly confusingly known as the Sadler's Wells Ballet at this point, but by 1956 they were awarded a royal charter. So that brought under sort of one umbrella, if you like, what had by then become a rather diverse institution, all of it still, as from 1926, managed, directed, overseen by de Valois as company director, the person with the general vision, but more specifically as teacher. She taught the students, she taught the company. In the early days, she was the leading dancer in the company. Her corps de ballet were her students. She was the leading dancer, and she would have guest artists, people like Anton Dolin and Alicia Markova. And then, of course, Dame Alicia sends de Valois a message for her own This Is Your Life. And that's why, because they became her first leading dancers, her star dancers, who would attract an audience when her company was still trying to build a following. That moment in 1964 marks the year following her retirement, when the company has set sail, if you like, without its founding director and is really finding its feet. And the person who had assumed the directorship was Sir Frederick Ashton. He's acknowledged as being the founder director of the Royal Ballet Company because from 1935 he had joined de Valois' company and become its main choreographer. So it's just at this moment that Ashton has really taken off in his own right as director that This Is Your Life is filmed. Sir Robert Helpman was really her first leading man, a creation, if you like, of her company. That's not entirely accurate because he had already had a very successful career in Australia, where he came from. But she took one look at that face and said, gosh, I could do something with that face. He had the most extraordinary expressive eyes, very sort of unusual face, highly theatrical presence. He was incredibly important to the company, and also not only through his example of sort of courage, theatrical courage, he really reached out to people, got a huge following, cult of personality almost. Well, it was very interesting for me to look at the photographs and realise that the ballet that they'd chosen for This Is Your Life was Frederick Ashton's birthday offering. And he made it in 1956 to celebrate the 25th anniversary of what was then known as the Royal Ballet Company, Dame Ninette's company that she had founded 25 years before at the Old Vic and Sadler's Wells theatres. And so that is very significant because it's a celebration piece. But even more than that, the piece is acknowledged as being an enormous celebration of the strength of the company in its leading dancers. So the original 56 production had 7 magnificent ballerinas with their 7 superb male cavaliers. And of course, the central couple were Margot Fontaine and Michael Soames, Fontaine being the prima ballerina assoluta of the Royal Ballet Company. And so it was very interesting to see that they had chosen 3 of the ballerina roles for 1964. And we were just going into this wonderful Ashtonian age under Ashton's directorship, which in many ways was a golden age of the Royal Ballet Company. And so you see these 3 magnificent ballerinas. You get Antoinette Sibley, Lynn Seymour and Noel Park, who all very different ballerinas, but representing the best different facets of the Royal Ballet's style. And what a wonderful thing to do, to look at. You know, you've retired and look at the strength that you've left. So it was a real statement being made by choosing that, I think. Because it must have been Ashton who, for This Is Your Life, chose those 3 ballerinas for 3 particular solos. So a lovely tribute, which of course de Valois herself would instantly have read all of those messages. I think she would have thought of it more as a nice way to show the warm and grateful side of herself to the people that had worked with her, people who contributed to the programme and turned up and said nice things about her. And you can see from the images that she's having a wonderful time. She's on great form. She's at a party. Because there were very much 2 sides to de Valois. When she was in a work situation, she could be utterly terrifying, and most people were terrified of her because she was demanding and sometimes contradictory, and herself could be quite unpredictable. So she was a scary person to work with. She could be unreasonable. But here you see the other side of her. The other great thing about her was that she could dissolve into giggles at any moment. She had a wonderful sense of humour, but also great fun. And I think in This Is Your Life, you see she's really having a good time. She's really enjoying seeing all these people that she's terribly fond of. And they were her family. The Royal Ballet Company has often been called a family, the School and Company, and it was her family, definitely.